Our show wouldn't exist without you listening. But if you want more information on how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or just to stay in touch, go to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there. You know what we do here on Flipping the Lid, and I just get super excited to be able to tell these stories. These stories matter because we're tapping into the collective wisdom of other people's experiences to shorten your curve to learning. And I get introduced to some really incredible people, successful, unbelievable entrepreneurs, people who are creating impact, but I really like depth, as you know. And so this individual I recently got introduced to, and though I don't know her very well, in our pre-interview, I can tell that this woman has depth. She actually has connection, and you can tell the way that she moves through the world. And so she is someone who's considered to be a business productivity consultant, but really what is she doing? She's helping people do less while creating more time freedom, more financial freedom, produce higher outcomes with less input by clearing the interference and building systems around you to build your life and your business. And this is so critical and essential, but the only way to do that with clarity is for someone who has actually flipped open their lid themselves. And Shanice, it's clear that you've done that. So I am so grateful that you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Brian. I'm so grateful to be here with you.
So I obviously introduced you based on how I see you in the, 5 or 10 minutes that we've known each other and the little bit of bio information I had from our intake form. But the one question I like to ask every single guest is, who are you in your words?
Wow, that's a very loaded question. And it's usually one that usually people are like, so tell me about yourself. I'm always that person who freezes up. It's just like, what in the world do I say with this question? Because there are so many different layers and dynamics to myself and to all the people that I meet. So just saying one area and saying like, oh, I'm a businesswoman. Well, that's not all. I'm also love my family. I love my friends. I'm a person who's very systems oriented. I am a host of a podcast called Do Less, and I am the owner and founder of Tasley Group. I'm a very curious mind, and I could just go on and on and on.
Keep going. I like the flow you're in. I want to hear more. Give me some more layers. Come on.
I love reading. I read a lot of really nerdy books about business, finances. So we go into a far depth with that. And, you know, when people need advice, they come to me.
I love that. I even like the identification with nerdy. I often say that I geek out on certain things because I do. I get like in the weeds of something and I just get this weird excitement that connects me to it further. And I just like to dive in. So I fully appreciate that. Just since we're on the point of nerding out, I got to know, what are the things that you nerd out or geek out on the most?
So systems, of course, I'm always looking and seeing like, okay, what's this new technology that I can do less with, that I can automate, that I can add to whatever it is that I'm doing so that I can really just be a better person, improve upon. I always say 1% better each day. That's a big thing. So really nerding out is books. I get lost in books all the time. Like I said earlier, just reading up on finances, reading up on business, self-help, self-improvement, just all sorts of things, class and culture in America. I just find so much interest in different ideas, different concepts, learning about those.
All right. So now I'm going to flip something on you. We're going to have a little bit of fun before we actually start getting deep because I just like where you took this already. I have to know.
Flip my lid.
You're all right. We're going to flip it. We're going to jump in. I promise we're going to get there. But let's just start small because this one's a good one. I am also an avid reader, but my wife gives me shit because I don't actually read a single book. I listen to them all. I'm convinced I'm dyslexic. My daughter actually is diagnosed dyslexic, so I'm sure I am. But I also am an avid consumer of knowledge, right? Like that's now how I'm starting to say it. I have to know, what are your top 3 favorite books? And I don't care the category.
Okay. So I always give someone a favorite, usually based on where that person is in life. So it's going to be a good favorite or a good read to that person, depending on where they are. So I read this one book called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. And she also has a TED Talk, but it was about how your 30s are not the new 20s. And that was so powerful, so impactful, so moving that anytime I see a teen, late teen, 20-year-old, I give them that book because it has so many things and areas in there of importance that we should be aware of and not squander them away. And it can go for other people who are older as well, because the premise of the book is that you're not too old and you're not too young to start planning for your future. And the decade that you're in now is going to prepare you for the decade that's 10 years from now. So whatever you're doing now, it is preparing and setting you up. And whatever you don't do now is preparing you and setting you up for what you're not doing in the future.
I also think that many people minimize the power of what a decade can do.
Yes.
Right.
Even 5 years.
In terms of even 5 years, I agree with that completely. But, it's interesting because it's like we just ran our retreat. I loved your whole point of saying, yeah, you're never too old. Right. We had people ranged from 26 to 60. Right. My oldest clients have been in their mid 70s who are now all of a sudden starting to actually unpack, look inside, do the work so they can live the remainder of their life. But I find often when I'm consulting or coaching or speaking and giving wisdom to people who are under the age of 30, and I want to be really clear here, there's zero age shame. I've been one of the youngest ones in so many rooms my whole life.
Me too.
And I was age shamed actively. So I don't mean this like it's a young thing, but I will tell you that even myself in my mid 20s, even after levels of success, even after having multi-million dollars in my business in my 20s, I still didn't appreciate the value of a full decade of adult experience and professionally, personally, interpersonally, health-wise, what all of that can actually mean, right? And I think we start to get greater perspective on that over time, but time is one of those things that's relative and not everybody appreciates. So that's a very powerful takeaway. I'm gonna just skip over the other two books for the moment because I loved that, and I just wanted to kind of take that where we were. I would really, really like to hear about your upbringing, and I know that's very broad, but you referenced some very specific things towards your dad. So I'd love for you to tell us about your dad, the relationship you had with your dad, and the experience that you had growing up with him. And I don't even mean it from the business standpoint yet. I literally just mean as his daughter.
Where do I start?
You tell me. You tell me.
So I grew up and I watched my dad literally go from working a job to going to school at night so that he could get his master's in his trade, to getting side work while working that full-time job, to leaving that full-time job and being able to have that side work replace the money from the full-time job, to building his company all the way up to 7 figures, only for it to all come crashing down because he didn't have the systems in place to run it when he wasn't able to show up. And seeing that growing up, seeing that development, that change over time, someone who is so proud, someone who was always independent, to have this crazy health kind of freak type of thing that happened. No one could have guessed it or even have said, okay, this is coming up in the future. No one could have predicted it. He ended up he went legally blind within a 4-year time frame. And that was really eye-opening to watch just how that all came up just for it to come crashing down. And I realized at that young age, it didn't have to be that way, but it also gave me this realness to life that, okay, you need to start thinking and planning ahead of time because you don't know what can happen. And just owning a business, being that bottleneck, being that one that's always doing isn't necessarily the best place to be in, because what if you can't show up for your business anymore? You still need it to be able to run without you. You still need to be able to have money that's coming in, passive income without you. And so when I got out of college into the workforce, I came in with that mindset of, what am I going to do? This isn't going to be my forever career. I know I want to make a difference, make an impact, but I also know that I need to have that security and stability in case anything happens to me.
Now, obviously, you were talking about your dad, but there was a lot of heavy emotion that you were kind of holding back as you were talking about that, especially in the early stages. I'm curious, it makes sense that there would be emotion around your father getting sick and having some of those pieces, but it felt like some of that emotion was also about you. I could be off on that basis, but if you're willing to, I would love for you to kind of unpack maybe some of the things that you were actually experiencing when you were witnessing this kind of transformation and downfall of your father.
Yeah, I think it spoke to wanting to be able to predict everything. In that there are no guarantees in life. You can sit up there, set up things, do things the right way, and try to have all your ducks in order, but there are no guarantees.
Yeah, there are no guarantees. But when we don't feel safe, when we don't feel protected, right? We do things to create, whether it's real safety and protection or fabricated, right, mechanisms around ourselves to over control our lives, right? Feel like we can drive things towards a predetermined outcome, even though we already know the lesson that we can't. We still try, right? For many of us, and it causes this pattern of do. Perfectionism and control and shame is this deep byproduct of it. You know, that is one of the things that you even self-professed in the intake form, is this concept of perfectionism and control. And so if it comes from this place of wanting to be able to know the outcome, wanting to be able to see where it's going, wanting to be able to direct it, what role has perfectionism and control played in your life? And I don't mean that just business. I mean business and life.
Wow, that's loaded. I love that you're asking these questions. I think perfectionism has played in with me, sometimes getting caught up in something to try to make it perfect and not moving the needle forward. So it's like, oh, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do this. And I have learned and had to learn and keep reminding myself time over time again, like with my podcast, okay, if I do the video editing, I'm going to sit there for about 3 days doing the video editing to get something perfectly right. And so there are things that I have adjusted and I have learned to just try to relax about, but it still does come up. It comes up when I am, around my nephews and I'm just like, did you clean your ears? What are you doing? Are you washing your body right? And so it's like, okay, trying to give space and have that balance where it's like, this is good enough. This is fine. Let's have fun. Let's enjoy it and not just get caught up in trying to do things perfectly. But I also realized that I got that from my dad, because when I was younger, he used to tell us, and this was with coloring in the lines. He was always like, don't color out the lines, color in the lines. And he would make us do it over again if we were coloring messy. And he was really big on that. That was like, you're a kid. You're just trying to have fun. You're coloring crazy. And he's like, why are you doing it that way? Color in the lines or don't color at all.
Yeah.
And that's how he was with his craft as well. It was like he would do it and he would make sure everything was really neat and it was done right, and do your best. That was one of his things, or just don't do it.
Did your dad ultimately pass from the health issues, or is he still with us?
Nope,
okay.
He passed.
How old were you when fairly recently?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm really curious, how many years that he was alive was he dealing with these health issues that ultimately impacted his business and things? Was it 5 years, a decade? Like, give me a perspective on when it started to happen.
So it started happening. It was a trend that went really quickly. So from the time where I had graduated high school, he was fine and still able to drive a car. And then by the time I graduated college, maybe the next year, he was no longer able to drive a car.
Okay.
And then probably about within 10 years after college, that's when he passed.
Okay.
But pretty much, not able to.
So 12 to 15 years, the remaining 12 to 15 years of his life, you guys were experiencing this, dealing with this as a family. You're establishing yourself as an adult, a professional, building your own businesses alongside, his declining health over the course of a decade. I do want to ask permission, because even though I always say this, because you're on a show that's here and I am the host that I am, there are sometimes that I see something that I like to reflect back to people. Are you okay if I do that in this format?
Sure.
So it's interesting because even the initial question on who are you, I think your challenge in answering that question is because you're always wondering what is the answer that's going to be enough, what's going to be okay, what's going to be accepted. It's even still through the lens of perfectionism and validation and connection through performance. How is someone going to see me? Because if I color out the lines, I'm told that I'm not good enough. I shouldn't even do this, which is the fixed mindset, which also starts to further condition the control. Mm-hmm. What I'm really curious about for you is, do you feel that you ever got the connection, validation, and approval and love from your father that you always desired? And this is not to say that if you didn't, he's a bad person. I want to be really clear when I say that.
As I got older, I realized that parents can only give you and provide the tools that they had. And so when I look back and when I've talked to him about his story and how his upbringing was, he gave us more than what he had.
Yeah.
And so to an extent, it was like, yeah, you can always ask your parents for more. I could always ask or say, I wish my mom did this. I wish my dad did this. But when I reflect, and like I said, as I get older, it's one of those things like he gave the best that he could do with the tools that he had.
And perspective and time almost get everybody there if they're willing to open to that, to see both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm in the same place with my parents. I love them. I adore them. I'm grateful for all they've given. I can recognize the areas that maybe things could have been different. I could have been seen or understood a little bit better. I could have been connected a little bit better. I could have been a little bit more safe or a little bit more protected in the way that I operated. But the reality of it is that's what you start to realize later in life, is that they have shown up in the best capacity possible. However, that doesn't mean that in those moments when we don't understand that, when we don't have the perspective to bring it back, that we don't feel a void, we don't feel a gap, or even in some cases, it develop as resentment, anger, frustration, disconnection from the people that raised us, that brought us into this world. Did you ever experience any of that until you had the perspective? And if so, how did you work yourself through that?
Oh, yeah, I was angry. And I tried to keep my distance. That's how I dealt with my anger, keeping my distance, not going too far.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot. It's a lot to deal with, especially when someone is getting sicker and now they're getting sicker. And it's just like, how can you be upset with this person when they're sick?
Yeah. Yeah. Because then you almost feel guilty, shameful, like you're a bad person for having these emotions that aren't anything other than love and support for someone that you do adore, that you do love, but at the same time, you feel the need to have some distance from.
Yes.
Shanice, I just want to pause and say thank you very much for already taking us where you have. You clearly are being extremely vulnerable. You're clearly being very open. You're being trusting, and you're showing some really hidden and sometimes dark parts about even who we are. And I'm grateful for your willingness to lean into that, because through your words, you're also connecting and identifying with our audience members who've also had those struggled relationships, who've maybe had parents who've passed. You're giving them permission to feel and say things and understand and articulate pieces about their own experience that they may not have otherwise. And the grace with which you talk about him, it's obvious to see the loyalty that you also still exist with and around. And it's a beautiful thing. So thank you for going there. Truly. You left college, you started building your own business, and you, in some ways, repeated the pattern your dad did.
I did.
Where you didn't have all the systems and structures. So talk to us about that rise and where that led you.
So I started off being an educational consultant because I had graduated college debt free with $10,000 in the bank. And that was one of those things.
Good for you.
How
Good
did
for you.
And it was through scholarships. And people were asking me how I did it and things like that. And so that was what the basis of that first business was built upon. But I did not set myself in that way. I went off with that mindset. And of course, being in my early 20s, I was 22 when I first started that business. It was, okay, let's go ahead. Let's get clients. Let's get on a roll. And then before I knew it, I had gotten that groove in and I was overwhelmed. And I was tired and I didn't know what to do. And even though I had coaches and mentors, no one was really talking about putting systems in place. A lot of the coaches and mentors were telling me like how to get clients, how to, it was small things like, oh, okay, you can set up a calendar link and things like that. But no one was really talking about those structures that could really help take you out of the business. So I felt stuck in that business and really smothered and exhausted and tired. Even after having like a really, really good week, I was just like, I cannot do this anymore. And I decided to sell it before it got too out of hand and before I just said, let me just quit it. Because I've seen too often, and that was the same thing happened with my dad's business. Like he's on the way up, but when you are that person who is just doing everything goes through you, it's hard to unravel yourself from that. And I found that in myself too. It's hard to give up some of that control, to give up some of those tasks that I didn't need to be doing. Those were the tasks that I was finding myself gripping to the hardest. And so it's like you're wanting people to do it exactly how you would. And I had to do that mindset shift to say, this person's not going to do it how I'm going to do it. Let me give them a nice criteria standard And then I can kind of give them some updates, but let them to kind of lead and do certain things as well, because we're all different. We bring different ideas and different strengths to different things. So, but that still didn't come about until I actually sold that business. And that's when I saw other business owners who were selling their businesses. They were selling them for a higher multiple than mine was selling, and they were doing less work. And I said, how are they doing that? And that's where my curiosity comes into play, because I'm always like, how is this person doing this? How can I do the same thing? Let me reverse engineer what they're doing. So as I'm sifting through different business listings, I'm seeing the systems that are being put in place. I'm seeing what they are having, what their structure is like. And it's like, that's what you do. You needed to have done these things to be able to have a nice, successful business where you're not doing 60, 70, 80 hours a week, where you can actually do less. And so that other people can step in and you can get that big exit if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Systems are incredibly important, and they really are one of the only ways to effectively scale a business, right? Yeah. You can grow business all day long, but if you grow a business and your gross income and your profits stay the same in a marginal capacity forever, you're just giving yourself more and more work, trading time for money, and giving yourself a job versus becoming a business owner and creating scale, right? Scale is, I can do more with less and I can generate more profit with the same input. It's about, how do I teach and enable other people? How do I delegate? How do I empower? How do I elevate? How do I actually replace myself? Which is a really interesting thing. Systems are never what keep people stuck.
No.
But they are what help people scale, right? And even what you even just said is that the blind spot that kept you stuck in moments, even in your own business, was still the element of the emotional trigger that was connected to what was creating the control and the perfectionism, right? It's, I have to be able to do it all to be a successful business owner. And in some ways, you're unconsciously modeling what your dad taught you and created, which is, you have to be the business. You have to be the face of the business. You've got to leverage the business. But in most cases, when that happens, you've just given yourself a job.
Yes. And that was all I knew as well. Like I was taught one way. That was the way that I thought things went. And I had to learn otherwise. I had to unlearn the things that I had learned.
Yeah. And I think that's a pretty significant paradigm shift when you also start to realize that truly, outside of even the profit that's being built, one of the measurement points for valuation of a business is actually the intellectual property that's tied to the systems that can be replicated beyond the founder, owner, or leadership team, right? That is one of the key parts of due diligence, is really understanding what's the sustainability of this business beyond this person, right? Like, I have a business today that can't exist without me yet, right? It's not like the other businesses that we've built and sold. It's right now, I'm the product and we're creating different ways to differentiate that. But that's the end goal, is how do we get there? I'm really fascinated. This concept of selling your business is what allowed this to concrete for you. So you sold your business, had a successful exit. So congrats on that. That's amazing.
Thank you.
What has your life looked like since the exit? And how have you approached business, life, or systems differently since you had that experience?
Yeah. So after that exit, I did take a little bit of downtime, not too much though, to really pivot and see, where is it that I want to be? And systems didn't come to mind immediately. I went through and I tried different things. I bought an established business afterwards because I was just like, oh, okay, the best way, get something that's already in place. And I built that up a little bit and then sold it for a profit as well. And so I was just going through this way of, okay, what is going to be the best thing for me? What's this trial and error that I can go through to find out, okay, where is it that I want to be next? And that's when I kept going back to thinking about all the businesses I combed through, all the things they had in place. What were the things, my blind spots of when I was in business, and realizing that was the gap in the marketplace. The gap was actually having someone there to do a done for you type of system, to put these systems in place, to tell you what it is that you really need and do it for you, not just, oh, here's the resources, go out and try it on your own, because that takes too long. And to really be able to guide and tell someone, okay, this is exactly like how you can get yourself out, and to help with that mindset shift, like I had to get out of my own mind.
Yeah. What were some of the ways that you allowed yourself to identify and separate between the duties that were essential for you to perform versus the ones that someone else could do versus the ones that maybe don't even need to be done?
So first it started off with, what are the things that I don't like doing? Because all the things I did not like doing, I was taking up so much time. It was draining me. I would really feel so exhausted after doing them. And I just knew that me being the person to do that just wasn't efficient. And so I still go back and rest on efficiency. How can I do less? What are the things that I'm doing now that can be handed off? And so it was first those things that I just realized I didn't enjoy. And then it was, okay, what are some of these tasks that are kind of like a low dollar amount task that you can hand over to someone to do if you just told them the individual steps for doing them that you would like to do them. Because I learned as well, I'm like, okay, I'm not the secret sauce in all of this. I would like to think so, but someone else can do these same steps if I just show them the exact steps that I do.
As good or better in some cases.
Exactly. I say the same thing because other people have different experiences and strengths, and they're like, oh, you can do it this way instead. And it's just like, okay, well, go at it. But there are certain things, and like I said before, the podcast, editing the podcast, doing graphics, doing website design. If I tinker with it, I will take all day. And I realize I'm taking all day when really my mindset and what really moves the needle forward is focusing on my marketing and my sales. And so I had to realize these are these three main areas. And that's what I help all my clients with is marketing, sales, and client services. Because if you're taking yourself out of the little day-to-day weeds, small, basic things that you're doing, they really don't move the needle forward. Marketing and sales, and then delivering the services that you said you were going to provide. Those are the things that move the needle forward. So how can I focus more on those things and eliminate anything else that's distracting me from that? Yeah,
I really appreciate that. I mean, marketing and sales are so critical for every business. I mean, if you can't be growing top line revenue, you don't really have a business, right? And I don't mean it like if you're not growing, then you're a bad person or you're running a bad business. I just mean genuinely, that's the whole point. You have to have leads. You have to be able to convert those leads into customers. You have to be able to then maintain those customers over some lifetime value that you think is going to be necessary to make it sense for your business. I like how you really broke that out. And we're going to talk marketing and sales in just a second. But I do want to say, I think one of the most critical things that I actually work with a lot of my clients who get in their own way in their businesses with is before they do any task, I like the way you segmented it and how you even said you started with the stuff you don't like, right? The stuff that's low dollar, like low risk, right? It's more transactional. And I think even the framing on that fits within the same window. I always ask 3 questions before I do anything and teach the same thing. Is this something that only I can do, right? Like truly, there are certain things in my business nobody else can do. They won't be capable of. They cannot be me. They can't be the leader. They don't have my timing and risk tolerance. They don't have my wisdom. They don't have my experience. They have different, right? There is a percentage of that.
On this podcast to get to the root of things.
Something like that. Something like that. Yeah. I think I've said for years I'm only as good as my questions, but you just told me that means I'm pretty good. So thank you. I'll accept that. But I mean, truthfully, it's like, what are the things that only I can do, right? There's some things I can't teach. I can't systematize. It's just a fact. Then the next layer for me is, what are the things that someone else can do? Even if it's something I've convinced myself that I need to do it, or even if it's something that I can't delegate or offload today, right? I might not have the team. I might not have the resources. We might not be in the right growth stage. And then the last one is, what are the things that don't even need to be done?
Yes.
Right. And I find that those 2 questions, we find so much waste that can be transformed into wealth because it's people who are doing things that I don't even like using the word should, because should is a shame-based word. It implies who you are, what you're doing, but shouldn't even be doing, right? Like they should not be spending time. Like you ideally should not be editing your own content. No. You should not be in the weeds of your website, at least at this point in your business development. At some point, though, it meant meaningful experience, knowledge, context to be able to direct people. So I'm a believer that we kind of need to be jacks of all trade, but we need to know what only we can do, because that's our unique brilliance that we monetize in the world. It always is. I
completely agree with that as well. And there is a level of understanding to have before passing it off to someone else.
You have to. I think you have to have some level of proficiency and mastery to be able to effectively create a system around it. Now, the flip side to that is, I know that I exist in two different ways as a leader. There are times when I ask my team to do something and I have a vision for it. I believe I know the path to get there. I believe I know the outcome. I believe what it will look like, which makes it incumbent upon me to decide in that moment, do I want to outline it so that it follows my path? Or do I want to open it up to creativity and collective wisdom of the group to decide it? There are other times as a leader that I know what I want to get done, but I have no fucking clue how to get there. And it's also my responsibility to make sure that that's known by the team to say, I don't know, which means I don't have a lot of expectations.
I like
Show
that.
me what you can create, right? Because the reality of it is I'm doing them a disservice if I'm not clear in my direction. If I know a path and I want a path and I don't communicate it, then I'm going to gaslight my team if they don't do it the way that I want them to do it, but shame on me for not communicating it.
Yes.
But on the flip side, if I don't have a clue how to get there, but they think I do, they're going to be constantly questioning, well, did I do it right? Did I not do it right? What are the expectations? What does Brian want? How do you help the businesses that you consult identify between those two and step into leadership to be able to communicate as effectively as possible so their teams can operate with autonomy?
Ooh, now that's a big whole boatload that you just asked of how you do it.
I mean, you could teach a master's course on it. Let's go. Come on.
Do we have the time? But in a summary, I meet people where they are. I don't try to stretch someone way further than where they're trying to go. And everything stems from where are you trying to go with your company? Because some people need baby steps and some people need a little bit more reining in. And some people need clarity in where they're trying to go. And so when we're breaking up and we're looking at people and we're asking people, okay, what are you doing? We're starting at a very simplistic viewpoint on things like, okay, in the simplest way, how can we get you to where you want to be in the quickest way possible? And for a lot of business owners, it's as easy as, okay, well, I'm doing all the client work. How can I get out of that and delegate that to someone else? And that's when we have that discussion where we are saying, okay, we know that you're probably not a systems person, but tell us, what is it that you're doing each step of the way? And then we will systemize it out for you and put it into a system. And so now it's already done for you. You don't have to think about it. We've outlined your process for you. You can see it on our workflow chart. And you're like, that's exactly what I do when I thought I didn't have systems or processes to begin with.
I find that there's always a system and a process, even if we don't know it's there.
It is.
Right? I thought that was really beautiful how you even just said that, because we have ways that we operate, sometimes consciously, sometimes intentionally, and sometimes just on autopilot.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is we often, most human beings are creatures of habit.
Yeah.
Right. So even if it's not an efficient process, I will often go about doing the same task the same way almost every time because it's comfortable for me to do it that way. And for you to be able to even bring awareness to owners who don't believe they have systems and processes that all of a sudden can take a step back when you've interviewed them, understood it, and map it out so they can visually consume it, they're like, oh, I do have processes. Yeah. That's what we often try to get people to slow down on long enough, is whether we build it for them to show them a visual or not, whether they're leveraging interns or new employees or they've got some really high level executive staff, it almost doesn't matter. The reality is like, how are you consistently evaluating how you're running your business?
Yes.
Because working in your business and on your business, we hear the distinction on that. But if you don't know how your business is being run at any level, there's a lot of waste often that exists in those areas of lack of knowledge.
There is.
How are you helping business owners raise their level of awareness around where the waste exists in their organization and where that waste is connected to their own personal blocks?
So to go back to the books, since I'm a book nerd.
Yeah.
One of the best books about this is Traction. And we do.
Great book. Great book.
We do follow up with a lot of their practices that they talk about, which are to one, list out what are your rocks, what are the 3 things that you really want to accomplish in this particular quarter. And a lot of times with our clients and their creatives, they'll say like, I have all these ideas, I don't know where to start. And so there's an area for you to put down your backlog of ideas, all the things that you want to do. But this quarter, we're going to focus on these things. And how, what are these main things that we want to do this quarter, not get distracted by all of the other little things that we could be doing, and then prioritizing it that way.
Yeah, just a forced prioritization,
Yeah.
which is really beautiful, which a lot of people don't go through that process. So
And then next quarter, we can revisit that list
yeah,
and see if we move stuff over.
that's amazing. I really appreciate that when you focus on marketing and sales, that's when your business grows, right? That's when your life grows. That's when you create more freedom. It's so simple in concept, so difficult for somebody to step into. And so that's what I would be really curious about is, when did that aha light bulb go off for you that marketing and sales is the greatest use of your time and energy and focus? And how are you helping entrepreneurs be able to set up systems to have predictable and sustainable growth through marketing and sales?
So I realized this when I was the face of the brand, and still am. But in my first business, people wanted to get on the phone and they wanted to talk to me. And afterwards, they didn't necessarily care who was like doing the review or anything like that, but they just wanted to hear me say I could help them with their problem. And so that kind of set that light bulb off that, oh, marketing and sales should be my focus, because if I stop either of these, I'm not going to have a business. I'm not going to have any clients to help out. And so that is what became my main focus. With the client services, client delivery, I realized I was doing and saying the same things, or at least some variation of them, even with my customized clients over and over again. So I said, okay, there are things that I could definitely pass off, but I just wasn't doing it because I was so into that business. And when those light bulbs hit, even though I was so entrenched in it, I said, next go around, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to release the reins. I'm going to take perfectionism from 100% to 90 because I'll be honest, as you pointed out, I still struggle with that perfectionism, wanting things to be top tier, top notch. And this going down 10% and being okay with that, that's a big win for me.
Yeah. What if you viewed the standard that you choose to operate through the effort and intent versus the outcome? How would that change things for you with your perfectionism pattern?
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, if you know that in any given moment you've operated with the best of your ability, the best knowledge, the most amount of information possible to make a decision, and in that current moment, you made a decision to do whatever, okay? Then what you can celebrate is the fact that you've done everything possible to set yourself up for the greatest likelihood of success, knowing that you can't control the outcome. But if you operate consistently across the board at a standard in how you choose to show up, how you choose to evaluate information, and that becomes your system for evaluating success versus failure, then the reality of it is you're honoring the effort and intent that you're consistently conditioning, and removing your worth or belief system on what's good or bad from the outcome of whatever you've done.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So how might that change your view on perfectionism if you were able to shift that effectively for yourself?
It helps to let go. To just, it's there, it will be done. And good is better than perfection when perfection isn't presented.
I'm curious, has there ever been anything that you released that wasn't perfect that materially damaged you?
No. Nothing that I couldn't have bounced back from, or, that wasn't, I don't think anything that was materially damaging.
So even when things haven't been perfect, you've been completely okay.
Yes. 100%.
It's one of those things that's like a really hard paradigm. I'm curious, what are you still struggling to let go of?
That's a good one. I'm still struggling to let go of being in the business. I keep finding other little areas to put myself back in, and then trying to wind myself back out again. So it's like, oh, okay, let me add this because it'll add value. And now I need to talk to this person to go through here. And it's just like, you don't need to do that. Stop that. But it is that added check, still wanting to make sure everything is right and looks good. And if I just shift my mind over, then I'm like, okay, let it go. Even when I'll work with people and some of my subcontractors, they'll say this is what we did. And my first gut feeling is like, oh, let me tell them what I did. And I'm just like, nope, let it go. But it's still that reprogramming each time. And I think that's what I want to emphasize, that it doesn't just go away because I change my mind, I reframe my mind. It's still there in the back of my mind.
It's
And I am that person who I just have to keep overriding it.
Well, what I would challenge on that is I agree with you. I viewed fighting as the only way to get there for most of my life. And it was constantly about, where am I getting triggered? What am I understanding? What are the intellectual and emotional narratives that are tied to it? What we start to realize is, to your point exactly, they are adversaries in constant pursuit until the day we die. Yeah. The point is that if we get really, really good at seeing it, understanding it, being aware, owning it, unpacking it, doing the healing work that's necessary, the reality of it is that we get to a point where we're existing in those low frequency triggered states, control-based states for minutes and moments versus weeks, months, or years.
Yeah.
Right? It's about living in it less and less and getting to a point where you're going to be triggered less and less because of the constant surrender to the flow of life, that inevitably, if we allow ourselves to be in alignment, we're intentional in being in alignment with who we are, the universe really does reward a whole lot of those actions. Mm-hmm. And those actions are actually doing less. It's being. I was a do kind of guy, right? Okay. Like the more I did, the more I could do, the more I could put on my plate. Literally, my equation was stress equals growth, right? Until I would crash, burn out, break down consistently multiple times and kept repeating those same patterns. It's still a tendency that I fight, but I learned in the last probably 5 years, the more that I can be, the more that I am. And it allows me to actually allow stuff to flow around me without creating all this resistance. Because most of the time, the resistance is just because of a cellular memory on an intellectual or emotional narrative, often which isn't even true given the current moment.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think we constantly have to pay attention to. And what I appreciate is even the ownership on your side, that you're like, no, like I still deal with it. It still comes up. It's still a narrative that I'm in a fight mode on still, because I haven't gotten to the place to surrender with it. And that's okay. The reason I really am so grateful that you're willing to go there is, being an entrepreneur, being a business owner can be really lonely for a lot of people, right? Because most of them experience these things that we're talking about. Most of them experience some element of shame, guilt, self-worth that impacts their ability to grow their business. Most of them find these patterns of control and perfectionism that give them the inability to lead teams, effectively create systems, delegate effectively. But it's these things that continue to show up as the areas that keep us stuck.
Yeah.
And so your willingness as someone who helps people do less, as someone who's still an active doer because of your cellular patterns, you're no different than many entrepreneurs. And your grace in how you're even walking through it gives others permission to feel and experience that truth for themselves. Because it can be an isolating, lonely game. I think it's really beautiful to even just listen to all the ways that you've integrated this. We've talked more business here in some ways than traditionally I would on this show. And it's largely because I think so much of the things that happened to you and a lot of your patterns did show up in your business directly. But I'm curious, how have you been able to create effective integration for both your personal and both your professional and your non-professional life? And how have these same patterns affected you outside of your business?
A lot of times my professional and my non-professional, so my personal life, are separate. I do my business things. I have my business friends, and I can keep it in that place. And then I have my personal friends that we can just hang out and we can just have a good time. And that's when I get to really release and not really worry about and turn it off and don't have to worry about being perfect. But it's just having those different areas, different modems, and just continuing on with my hobbies. Even though business and reading books about business, that's my hobby, it still seems separate to me because it's fulfilling that curiosity in my mind. So I'm still this person who, like, I love doing that. That's my hobby and I have it over here. But when I go to my friends, I'm like, I don't want to talk about that with you. I'll talk about it with other people that it might relate to and we can be on the same page with, but it doesn't have to be everywhere at all times. And there's definitely a time and place for different things.
Yeah, I mean, I call what you just described as presence, because you just have an ability to shift your focus between which world you're currently in. But what I meant by integration was not even how do your relationships bleed across them, but how are you building your life so that you get the time freedom to do the things that you want?
Oh, I schedule block.
You schedule blocks. So that's the other thing is again, how are you effectively setting boundaries so that you can do the things that are fulfilling to you? Because that's the whole point of what you even teach. Get more out of doing less and give yourself the time freedom to live the life you want. So tell us how you've done that yourself, and what are the things that are lighting you up in today's world that you're time blocking to protect and ensure you get to do?
Awesome. So now I understand what you were asking.
It's okay. It's beautiful. It's good.
When I was in the first business, I was responding to emails at all times of the day. I was doing all these things, and I was just like, I pinpointed those are the things that were wearing me down. That was the stuff I needed to let go of and to not do. And I needed to craft space. So I do time block my schedule where on Mondays and Fridays, I don't do calls. No calls whatsoever. So they're only stuck to Tuesdays through Thursdays. That's including any guest podcasting, recordings, any of those things, because those are my CEO days, my prep days, the days that I'm getting myself prepared for the week. And I'm that person who can have a really intense, I'm a good 10 to 2 worker. After about 2 o'clock, I'm starting to get tired. Before 10 o'clock, I'm not on yet. So, I mean, I can probably do something behind the scenes.
But knowing that about yourself is so critical.
Yes. And I can do something behind the scenes, but usually after around 2, 3 o'clock, when that comes around, I'm like, I'm ready to read a book. I'm ready to start winding down. I'm ready to close this off. And I found that's what works really well for me. If I keep that schedule, if I keep my busiest times, the times where I really need to work the hardest on those Tuesdays through Thursdays, 10 to 2, and then everything else can go around that day. So one of the things that I have added on was I wanted to take up golf lessons. And I did. And and it's been so wonderful. I found someone who wanted to do it with me, and we've just been having a blast out there. And it's like, both of us, and she's an entrepreneur as well. So it's just like, this is a great time from our day. You know, it's right at the end. So we usually do it around 3 o'clock. So definitely on Wednesdays, I'm like, see y'all. I don't care what else is coming up. I blocked off that time and a buffer before. And I'm like, you know, this is my time for us to be able to connect, because it's not just about playing golf. It's really that connection that I'm having with the other people that are out there, with the person who I'm talking with. We're catching up, and it just feels so good. And so once I started feeling
the other side of life.
Once I started feeling like, oh, this feels really good. And that was always the mindset I went in it with, was that I wanted to work because I wanted to, and not because I had to. And I remember those were some of the few things that I kept in mind starting out. I wanted to have free time to do the things that I enjoyed. I didn't want to wait until retirement to be able to travel. So that's another thing. I will incorporate a whole week, 2 weeks, and block off my schedule and travel and not look at it and not feel bad about it, because I've set it up the week before and when I get back as well. But I don't check emails.
I thank you for expanding and going further and staying with me to get a little more clarity on the question I was asking, because, so many of us don't actually pay attention to our core sweet spot of operation, right? Like, are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Are you a midday 10 to 2 person, right? I think that we get so conditioned because of hustle culture and some of the toxic shame that exists in so many professional environments, that it's like, if you're not working, or man, if you had an 8-hour day, but you could get all the work done in 2, then you're a bad person. Why aren't you filling more time, right? Like what you just really highlighted too is so many of us, I'm the same way. I work really, really well in 4 to 6 hour sprints.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's it.
But I can tell you that there are many a year, many a day where I would be stacked for weeks on end with 12, 15, 18 hour days, because that's what I believed was what was going to require to get me going.
Yes.
As I've shifted and surrendered to this whole concept of the more I feed myself, the more I understand the ways that light me up, the ways I get to connect with the people, the ways I spend time with my kids, the ways that I'm finding joy, freedom, and fulfillment, it also sparks more of the natural creativity and wonder in my business.
It does.
It makes me more capable. And instead of, to use a golf analogy, right? If you grip that club too tight, right? You're not going to be able to effectively hit it, because your grip is going to be, you're holding on too tight. 1 degree difference in how you strike the ball could be 100 yards difference in where it ends up.
Yeah.
It's no different in our real life. We hold on and pressure and push on the things that we think we need to be doing, when in reality, often that's not the case. I can tell you there've been times where I'm like, I've hit my wall for the day and I canceled meetings at the end of the day to go pick up my kids, play with them because I was depleted. I was not operating well and wondering what I could be doing further to advance my business. But through that surrender, I'd get a text message or a call or something else that just point blank fell in my lap by surrender.
Yes.
You just articulated that so great.
I completely agree. Even before I start playing golf, when I would get myself a roadblock and I'm trying to push through it, I realized I am not going anywhere. I'm trying to push through it, but I'm not being productive. Let me go for a walk.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is just so good to be able to honor again what we need, what our natural rhythms are. I'm not someone who sleep shames either. It's like, look, it's about what you do within the hours that you define are going to be what you get paid to do. And how effective and efficient can you be through either the people, the systems, or the technology to be able to do more with less?
Yes.
And that's what you're teaching people. Shanice, I'm really curious. I've got a couple other questions for you as we wrap here. We talked a lot about the experience with your father and how it impacted you specific to business. How did the experience with your father impact you outside of business?
So experience with my dad. It's just so many things. I remember so many of his quotes, and both my mom and him both led us to be leaders. Be a leader, not a follower. That was a big thing. And so I am that person who is just that knee-jerk action is like, take the lead. Go ahead and do this. I try to lay back. And then as soon as people get a little bit indecisive, I'm like, oh, we'll go this way. And so just some of those things, you hear the person, your parents, my parents' sayings coming back to mind as I'm going through life. I mean, even with the always do your best, just, try your best, do it. Be that leader, not a follower. There are just so many things that I took from him that really impacted me and that I'm very thankful for to guide me over the years. And I still hear those words as I'm going through life, as I'm doing stuff.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What's the legacy that Shanice Miller is going to leave?
Well, I've definitely made a mark on my nephews. And part of my legacy is in teaching and really being able to pass on the information that I know and giving that to the younger generation. Like right now, I don't have any kids, so just my nephews, but I definitely make sure to give them those good problem-solving skills, just hanging back a little bit. So I guess that's where I kind of release things. And I'm like, okay, well, you lead, which is the way we should go, because I want them to have those tools that we were given as well, so that they can be good problem solvers, so that they can see and be able to assess the situation pretty quickly and realize the best way to go with the knowledge that they have.
That's amazing. It sounds like that's exactly what you're doing in your business. I am curious, do you have a closing thought, and how can people find you? Because I definitely want people to be able to learn how to do more while doing less.
Yes.
And be able to live the lifestyle that you are showing people is possible.
So everyone can always come over to my podcast, it's Do Less, or you can find me at TasklyGroup_ on Instagram. So those are the two places where you could probably find me the best. And I would say just always ask yourself, as I always ask myself every day, how can I do less in this situation? And that has made a world of a difference.
Shanice, it's been a pure pleasure having you here today. And I really encourage everybody who's listening at this point, we'll put all that in the show notes to be able to come over and follow you. I really appreciate you, my friend. And for those of you that tuned in, Shanice flipped her lid. She got real, she got raw. In the first 10 minutes, she was talking about things that were deeply emotional. But here's the reality. Sometimes there's times in life that we get narratives that what we're doing, like coloring out of the lines, is not the way that we need to operate, which makes us believe that we need to become something sometimes that we're not. We end up creating control and perfectionism and doing a lot to be able to find our way in this world. But what we also find through actually doing the work is that it's actually about, how do you live in your realm of genius? How do you create leverage and scale in your life? How do you actually produce equal or greater outcomes while your inputs decrease? Shanice Miller has shown us how she's continued to refine in her life how she continues to refine in her life, and how she's letting go so that she can live more. You have the same opportunity, but it's going to require you to flip open your lid and scan your can. What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flippin' the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippinthelid.com. We'll see you there.